From the Arizona Daily Star and Tucson.com, this is the Wildcast.
You're listening to the latest episode of the Wildcast podcast right here on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or other podcasting platforms. Also available via the Wildcaster mobile app. I'm Justin Spears here with Michael Lev coming at you after a wild game in Los Angeles. The Wildcats falling to the 9th-ranked USC Trojans, 43-41 in triple overtime. Lev, we were both in LA for this game. It was absolutely insane. And we'll get to like more mailbag questions because I know a lot of people have some thoughts on this game and wanted us to address some questions. We'll also talk a little bit of recruiting news that happened late Sunday night. But I think we should start off with the Arizona USC game. Losing 43-41, we saw Noah Fafita start in place of Jaden Delora, and Noah passed for 302 yards, had 5 touchdowns and 1 interception. I thought was very clean for the most part. Jonah Coleman in place of Michael Wiley had 22 carries for 143 yards. And then you look at those receivers for Arizona. Tetairoa McMillan, 6 catches, 138 yards. Jacob Cowing, 10 catches, 87 yards, and 4 touchdowns. I thought Arizona's offense, for the most part, was pretty damn spectacular. 505 total yards. And when you couple that with Arizona's defense really setting the tone and limiting Caleb Williams. I know he got things going with his legs in the second half, but all in all, I think that Arizona should be feeling pretty damn good about themselves right now. They're 3-3, Lev, and these 3 losses are by a combined 16 points. We're talking about an overtime loss against Mississippi State, a 7-point loss to Washington and Michael Penix Jr. and their great team. And then on the road in LA against Caleb Williams, the defending Heisman Trophy winner, losing by 2 points in a triple overtime shootout. I know Arizona fans don't want to hear about moral victories at this point, but you got to like about this team and where they're at. Now, with that being said, you wrote about this in your 5 takeaways. Is this the what could have been year for Arizona? Because, man, if these games had swung in favor of the Wildcats, Arizona could be looking at right now being bowl eligible or close to it.
Yeah, they really easily could be 5-1. The Washington game, it ended up as a 1-score game, but Washington was pretty much, in control of that game, leading the game throughout. It was a late score that made it a 7-point margin. They needed to recover an onside kick in order to get the ball back. The other 2 games, they very easily could have ended up in the win column. Why did they lose is my question, why didn't they win, when they had the advantage in yards and you just rattled off all the great, superlatives and statistical excellence, that was put up by so many different players. I would say the Mississippi State game, it's pretty obvious turnovers were the biggest cause as to why they didn't win. This game against USC, I would cite 2 factors. One, just the brilliance of Caleb Williams. I mean, singular force, used his legs in unexpected and in very impressive ways when the passing game wasn't working. I mean, he had a plan B, and that plan B was pretty unbelievable. Even on that the 2-point play that ended up being the winning score, he kind of Tacario Davis had an angle on him. And he kind of okey-doked him a little bit, he kind of hesitated just a slight bit to get the angle to the outside. And there I saw one photo, from the end zone angle. I mean, it was so close, but he, very Patrick Mahomes-like, great awareness of the entire field, all of the different angles, just extended the ball over the pylon. Absolutely brilliant. And then the other factor I would cite as to why Arizona did not beat USC is penalties. They ended up with 12 penalties for 99 yards. I believe 7 of those were in the second half. And a lot of them were drive extending infractions, roughing the passer by Justin Flo on 3rd down. There was a pass interference against Tacario on 4th down. Those pass interference penalties, sometimes they're kind of, they're 50-50 calls on 50-50 balls, they could kind of go either way. But those the after the whistle ones are the ones that will drive coaches crazy. Those are the ones that, Arizona can't afford to make. We
Yeah.
know that Justin Flo kind of plays on the edge, and he went a little bit over the edge in that one particular situation.
It seemed like it was going to reach a boiling point on that one particular drive because him and Caleb Williams, I think it might have been the second play, they were exchanging some words. They were kind of, talking back and forth, and they were getting into each other, into each other's grill a little bit, and then next thing you know, on third down, it was an incomplete pass, by the way.
Yes, it was.
That roughing the passer called. So if Arizona forces that fourth down, let's say USC, do you think they go for it, or do they go out and kick a field goal? I mean, let's say they trot out their kicking unit. I mean, those are points right there. That drive resulted in a touchdown that could have swung in favor of Arizona.
Yeah, the next
holding
play
the
was
offense
a touchdown.
I was saying holding an offense like USC to a field goal, that's a victory. I mean, how often do we, or all the times that we talked about Arizona's defense this season, and whenever a team settles for a field goal, we're like, hey, that's a victory for the defense. Against teams like Washington, USC, limiting them to field goals, that's a victory. Arizona could have had opportunity to do that, but like you said, Lev, penalties just killed the Wildcats, especially in that third quarter.
It would have been 4th and 5 at the Arizona 21-yard line with the score at 20-14 in Arizona's favor in the third quarter. So I think that they likely would have kicked the field goal. Yeah. And it would have been 20-17. They would have been like, oh, we'll get within 3. There's plenty of time left, etc. Instead, it was the very next play. Marshawn Lloyd ran into the end zone for a touchdown to give USC the lead, the first lead that they had in the game at 21-20. And it was, back and forth from that point on. So you mentioned earlier that Noah Fifita played really well. I think that's indisputable. He did. Again, he played better, actually, I think, in a lot of ways than the first game. He threw for more yards with fewer attempts, higher average per attempt, more touchdowns, did have 1 interception, but not very many turnover-worthy plays. I mean, PFF only had him with 1. I think you could make a case that one pass down the left sideline might have been another. But overall, really good performance. He's kind of become a fan favorite in short order. And yet, if you interpret what Jedd Fisch said after the game, it seems like if Jayden de Laura is healthy and ready to play, whenever he's at that point, he's going to be the quarterback again. What do you make of that?
He put the kibosh on that real quick. Like he's like, this isn't going to be a conversation that we're having. It's no. Because I asked Jedd Fisch, does Noah's performance, does that warrant maybe a quarterback change? Do you look at maybe, hey, we can give Noah Fifita another start? And he said no, and just left it at that. And normally, like, Jedd Fisch is not a one-word answer type of guy. Mm-hmm. He may say yes or no and then give you an elaborate answer. He just said no and left it at that. So it looks like Jayden de Laura is going to be that guy. But Lev, you look at the stats. Noah Fifita, he's got 8 touchdown passes and 2 interceptions. Meanwhile, you have Jayden de Laura, and he's got 9 touchdowns and 5 interceptions this season. We all saw that in that Mississippi State game. Those 3 first quarter interceptions were very costly for the Wildcats. And, with how good the Pac-12 is this season, I mean, it's hard to find wins for the Arizona Wildcats. And much like the Cal game a year ago, we could be very well looking at that Mississippi State game like, man, what could have been? Arizona could have gone to a bowl game had Jayden de Laura not thrown all those interceptions in that game. But it's kind of a weird situation, Lev, because, on one end you have Jayden de Laura, who's got so many starts, so much experience, I think is a really good quarterback, right? I think Jayden gets a lot of unnecessary hate. I think he's a good quarterback. I really do. But with that being said, we've seen a lot of mistakes from him. He improvises, and sometimes when he improvises, he gets out of his responsibilities, like we saw against Stanford when he was just kind of dropping back and drifting away and away and away and really risking a huge loss of yardage on plays. And then on the other side, you have Noah Fafita, who doesn't have all the experience, but so far in what we've seen, plays very clean, doesn't have all those costly mistakes that we've seen from Jayden de Laura. Now, I don't think that this should really be a conversation, honestly, at this point. But it's very interesting that it is, because Jayden de Laura has been in the system now for a year and a half. And yet we, as media and also, people that watch Arizona football and follow it, we're talking about, is there a quarterback controversy? I think it goes to show how Jayden de Laura maybe hasn't progressed the way we thought he would have.
Yeah, it's like, is he ever going to change the way that he plays or the way that he is? And he probably won't. I mean, he's a risk-taking quarterback. He's super aggressive. He has a tendency to play hero ball, and that can produce incredible results, big plays, splashy plays. I mean, he was one of the main reasons that they beat UCLA last year at the Rose Bowl.
Absolutely.
It can also result in turnovers and head scratching plays. And like, why would he do that? But that's how he is. I mean, they are different quarterbacks without question. I think in this week's Cat Stats, Justin, I'm going to dive into the numbers a little bit now that we have a big enough sample size, I would say, on Noah Fafita to kind of see what the differences are between them. I think one of the differences, just taking an initial glance at it, is Jayden is got greater escapability.
Yeah.
He can really get away from the rush. He can make things happen either with his feet or extending plays and then throwing the ball. And Noah's good at that, but he's not as good. So I think that's one thing, but the turnovers are huge. And it doesn't seem like Noah's not as much of a risk taker. And when you have a good team surrounding you, that's probably a good thing. So it'll be very interesting to monitor that whole situation this week. We are recording this before Jedd Fisch's Monday press conference. There could be some news that comes out of that regarding quarterback situation that's even a little bit more concrete than what he said Saturday night. Of course, the next game on the docket is Saturday in Pullman against Washington State, which would undoubtedly be a very emotional game for Jayden de Laura. He has faced his former team once before, but he did not face them back in Pullman. So that adds a whole different layer to it. You wonder, is that really the best place to bring him back, or does it make more sense to wait another week? You get a bye after that game, additional 2 weeks to recover, get reintegrated, and then you're back at home for a couple of games after the bye. So I don't know. We'll see.
I will say this, Lev, that this is a very good problem for Arizona. And it kind of reminds me of what Rich Rodriguez said back in the day when someone brought up the whole, if you have two quarterbacks, then you have none statement. And Rich Rodriguez said, that's like saying, if I have two pizzas, then I have none. Like, does that make sense? No, it does not. And I think Jedd Fisch, he looks at this situation like, hey, I have a good quarterback now in my hands in Jayden de Laura, but this Noah Fafita guy, he's the future. And no matter what happens, I'm going to lean on Noah moving forward. And Noah's going to be the guy, and he's going to be the franchise quarterback for Arizona, and he's going to win a lot of ball games for the Wildcats. I'll tell you that. So with that being said, I think that Noah Fafita is the future, but Jayden de Laura is the now. But Jayden, I think, is on a much shorter leash, because let's say Jayden goes out and throws a bunch of interceptions and the offense stalls against Washington State. Man, a lot of people are going to be at Jedd Fisch's neck trying to get Noah Fafita back on the field. So he's going to be in a very interesting situation. But of course, Jayden de Laura could come back, look amazing, and everyone's back on the Jayden de Laura train. So this week in Pullman is going to be one of the most interesting games that Arizona has played all season long. There's no doubt about that.
I think maybe the change to the dynamic is that he's just not going to be as patient as he was before, Like maybe he views it as we have a 1A and a 1B. And if Jaden doesn't play well, messes up, or throws a bunch of interceptions, makes some head scratching plays, maybe he makes a move.
Yeah.
I know I know for a fact that Jed doesn't want to get into that kind of situation like 2021, where it was just musical chairs at quarterback and could never settle on anybody. I think he would much rather just have a guy, and this is the guy we're going to sink or swim with, and not have all that sort of, the controversy that can often swirl around these quarterback decisions. But it'll depend on Jaden's health and Jaden's performance.
Yep.
If he's the guy out there, and I think Jaden understands that too.
Yep.
I think I don't know what he's thinking, but I would guess at this point that he's like, hey, if I don't perform well, we've got another guy on our team who can run this offense. So, I better get my act together.
No doubt. Okay, Lev, now it's time for our Monday mailbag. Appreciate all of those who have submitted your questions via Twitter. We reach out every single week. I know Lev's got some via Twitter and email. I got some on my Twitter. Well, I guess it's now X. But we got some recruiting mailbag questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. I'm going to kind of lump all of these together. So we got one from AZ Wildcats. His question, or their question, is what's the deal with rushing? Will Height recommit? What other players is the coaching staff looking at after those two big decommits, assuring they have to try and bring in some big names? Some other recruiting related questions comes from Adam Gates. He said, I listened to an interview with Ricky Hundley recently where he talked about his commitment to Arizona and how important his word was no matter which you try to steal him away. Is that a mindset, a thing in the past? Rushing's dialect is now night and day to when he pledged to Arizona. These are the recruiting questions regarding Elijah Rushing and his decommitment late Sunday night. The 5-star prospect who was the top-rated defensive end in the 2024 recruiting class. He decommitted from the Arizona Wildcats. And, when he committed in July, I mean, you were at his commitment ceremony, Lev. Like, it was a very, very big deal. And it was kind of like, it reminded me a lot of like the football version of Sean Elliott, a guy who is so highly touted, highly ranked, and yet decided to stick with his hometown school to help rebuild the roster. I mean, people were putting him in that conversation with Sean Elliott. But on Sunday night, and recruiting is a wild, wild world, Lev. Sunday night, Lev posts on his social media accounts, I have taken into consideration that recent progress and strides the program has made. Although it is evident that the program is on the rise, I have to consider my future goal. I have come to conclusion that the program is not the right fit for me to take my next step with regard to my development, which is very interesting contrast to what he said back in July when he committed, because he said, I'll say, being a hometown kid born and raised in the heart of Tucson, this decision holds a special significance for me. An opportunity to represent my state, my community, and my family on the football field is a dream come true. It's a chance to give back to the place that has shaped me both as an athlete and as an individual. Lev, thoughts on Elijah Rushing's decommitment and what this means for the Arizona Wildcats?
Yeah, that particular post of his was unusual in the sense that you don't usually see anything remotely resembling criticism of the school you're decommitting from. So why would he say those types of things? I think, sort of reading the tea leaves here, that part of this decision is the fact that his brother Cruz went to Arizona and is not playing.
Yeah.
He's not out there in the field. He's not even second string. So I think there's a little bit of resentment. I don't know if that's coming from Elijah or if that's coming from the family over that. So I think that's one thing that's going on. And we had talked about this behind the scenes, Justin. I think a lot of this whole thing is NIL related.
Yeah.
that a certain other school that was one of Elijah Rushing's finalists is going to end up giving him a big NIL deal. And that's really what's going on here more than anything. The biggest percentage of what is behind this decision. And look, you mentioned Ricky Hundley earlier, and this just kind of idea of being all in. And it would have been awesome to have this local kid play for Arizona. He and the family kind of, I don't know, they kind of look bad going back on their word about, they made such a big deal about being different and going against the flow and representing the city and all of that kind of thing. And not doing that, I think a lot of people are angry with them, and it's sort of good riddance. But bottom line, like, are you in or are you out? Are you fully committed to this thing or are you not? And if you're not, then probably better off if you go somewhere else.
Yeah.
I'm sure that that's how the coaching staff is looking at it. They would love to have a player of his talent, with his size, his potential, his star rating, his, from being from the powerhouse school down the street. They would love to have him. But if he and his family are not fully into it, then it's probably not the best matchup. It's probably not the best pairing.
Yeah. And that was a part of the theme of this year's recruiting class, was getting the top in-state guys to stay home and play for the Wildcats. Before Elijah Rushing's decommitment, you looked at the top two players in state. Who were they? Elijah Rushing and Damon Williams, the 4-star quarterback from Chandler Basha, who's still committed, by the way. But those were number one and number two. The top offense and top defensive player committed to the home state school. That was a big deal. And that was the theme of this year's recruiting class. Because the first year, being the 2022 class, it was all about the offense. 23 was all about the defense. And then 2024, it was a mixed bag, but you saw a lot of in-state commits. They had 7 guys committed to Arizona from in-state, and now they're just down to 5 after losing Elijah Rushing and his teammate, Keona Wilhite, who is projected to go to Washington. I don't know if Elijah Rushing's decommitment changes anything with Wilhite. Maybe it does. I don't know. Because I always felt like maybe Wilhite felt like he was maybe a little bit in Rushing's shadow a little bit. Because whenever we talked about Keona Wilhite, it was like, Keona Wilhite, oh, by the way, he's also Elijah Rushing's teammate. I don't know if you guys know that. Where Elijah Rushing, we didn't really bring up Keona Wilhite. And so maybe Keona Wilhite felt like, hey, I got to maybe get out of Elijah Rushing's shadow a little bit, look elsewhere. I can't fault him for that, especially if he goes to a program like Washington. You see their edge rushers and how they develop those guys. Keona Wilhite would be going to a great situation if he were to go to Washington. Elijah Rushing, we assume that he's going to go to Oregon because defensive coordinator Tosh Lupoy was just in town visiting and recruiting him. So that seems to be like the destination for Elijah Rushing. And for Arizona, if it all comes down to NIL money, it's really hard to compete with Oregon and the Nike checks and all the funding that they have. Especially when they're willing to go all out for a player like Elijah Rushing. Sometimes you just got to take the L and move on.
Yeah, and as far as, other guys that they might bring in as replacements, I mean, I don't have that list in front of me. That's not really our area of expertise, but I'm sure they had a backup plan, not only on the high school level, but I'm sure they're thinking about the portal as well. If you look at this year's defensive line, it is a very nice mix of guys that they brought in from high school and guys that they brought in from the portal, and they're utilizing all of them, blending them together. It's really a great combination. I think a great way to go about building up certain position groups, especially in the interior. It's hard to find big guys who are ready to play straight out of high school. So, if you bring in some developmental guys like the Isaiah Wards and Russell Davises of the world, Jacob Kangaika, you balance that with portal acquisitions of players who have been in Division I, Power 5 weight rooms for several years and are physically ready to play, that can really work for you.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of roster construction has worked for them so far, and I think they will just continue to pursue that kind of path, especially given how flaky some of these recruits are.
Yeah.
You can only do so much concrete planning with high school players because those commitments are not binding.
Yeah. But it's also disappointing for Arizona too, because with Wilhite and rushing, it seemed like, hey, Arizona was finally starting to rewrite history a little bit. I mean, we saw how many South Point guys leave Tucson and go elsewhere. Bijan Robinson, Lathan Ransom, Bruno Fina, Mateo Mele, so many great South Point kids that decided to leave. And South Point's located less than 3 miles away from Arizona Stadium. But the thing with those guys that I just mentioned was Arizona didn't try to get them. They really didn't make a great effort. Like Texas and Ohio State went to more South Point practices than Arizona, which is inexcusable. Arizona, the first day that they were able to reach out to 2024 recruits, they were at South Point Catholic's weight room at 6 a.m. recruiting Keona Wilhite and Elijah Rushing. So they went all out for these guys. I don't know what happened after these guys committed to Arizona, but once again, Arizona, I wouldn't say they whiffed on South Point kids. This time they fumbled them. If Keona Wilhite doesn't go, I don't know. Who knows? Maybe things change with Elijah Rushing. I don't think they will, but just kind of a disappointing development when it looked like Arizona was going to get those South Point guys.
Yeah, you know what though? You keep trying. I don't think they should feel discouraged about this. Keep throwing your hat in the ring.
Yep.
Eventually you're going to win one of these battles. Eventually you're going to, find someone who prioritizes the fit and the coaching staff and maybe truly embraces the opportunity to represent their hometown.
Lev, moving on. I have one from Brad Malone. He says, is Fish receiving too much guff for not knowing the overtime rules? And are Arizona fans wrong to assume the Cats will start winning these close games next season? Maybe Fish does deserve a little bit of guff for not necessarily knowing what the overtime rules are, especially in second overtime. But I can't give him too much guff because, hey, you and I are both college football writers, Lev. We know all the weird rules and intricacies that are in college football. I had no idea about that. And I think maybe Jedd Fisch needed a reminder. Heck, even Noah Fafita and all these other players didn't know what the overtime rules were. They were just kind of going along with the flow. But what do you think about this? Is it necessary to give Jedd Fisch guff for not knowing exactly what the overtime rules are in that second period?
No, I think he deserves all of it, honestly.
Yeah.
Because I said that on Twitter too. Like, I didn't know the rules, and several people said, "Well, hey, you know what? You're not paid $3 million to coach a team."
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. What I mean? That's a good point.
So it is his job to know all of the rules and be on top of things. And I think we were talking about this as we were leaving the stadium Saturday night. He usually is on top of everything. You know, like he has an almost photographic memory. He can remember almost every play in every game, in every particular situation. And he just messed this one up. I mean, it's plain and simple. And I know what he said, like he wouldn't have gone for two after the first overtime touchdown, even if he knew exactly what the situation was. I don't think that would have been the case. I think he was just sort of trying to save face by saying that. I think he would have and should have gone for two. You end it right there. You know, you eliminate any possibility of Caleb Williams touching that football again. And I also think, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I don't think not one single Arizona football fan would have criticized him for going for two, even if they didn't make it.
After the first overtime, right?
Yes. You're a 21-point underdog on the road. You got a chance to beat USC. You go for it right then and there. And if you don't make it, you don't make it. Yeah. You know? And you dial up your very best play, whatever that is.
So
and it's not what happened.
So I have a bunch of I'm going to kind of lump these together. A lot of these
Yeah.
questions are very similar.
Okay.
So now I have one from Nico Abeda. He says, never calling for heads to roll, but do you think Noah Fafita played well enough to make it a battle with JDL? And here's another one from that Arizona fan. Legitimately, what is the deal with JDL and Fish? He has done nothing to warrant this type of loyalty. Noah is clearly the better quarterback and a better leader. Um, so a lot of people are calling about the quarterback situations with Arizona. I don't know. This is a very tough call, man. I really
Yeah.
don't know. But I think
Look,
that I
go
think
ahead.
Jed just wants to say that, hey, I invested every ounce possible into Jaden Delora, and if it doesn't work out, then this is on Jaden. Jedfish can say, hey, I tried everything I possibly could to make this Jaden Delora thing happen. It just turns out that Noah Fifita is the guy at this point. We'll find out this week in Pullman and beyond. But like I said earlier, I think now that Noah has shown you that he's capable of quarterbacking this team and winning you some ball games, even though he hasn't done it, he played against two top 10 teams. Give him a little bit of grace. The fact that Arizona was close in those games with a backup quarterback, I think shows the level of play that Noah Fafita can play at. So, like I said earlier, I think Jaden Delora is going to be the starter moving forward. But man, that leash is very, very short. And now Jaden, he's got to prove it the rest of the way.
The idea that he's done nothing to prove that he deserves to be the starting quarterback, I think is a little misguided.
Yeah,
I mean, he did throw for Jaden, that is. He threw for 3,685 yards last season, 25 touchdowns.
third most.
In his Arizona career in 16 games, he has 4,754 yards. He has 34 touchdown passes. He also has 18 interceptions, more than one per game. And that is probably too much. You could also argue, well, Noah Fifita's on kind of a pace to throw one interception per game, but he's also less experienced than Jaden Delora is. So you cut him a little bit more slack. Maybe in Jed's mind, he's like, if we had Jaden out there, he could have maybe done some of the stuff that Caleb Williams did with his legs, and that would have been the difference in the game. And we would have won by 2 points instead of losing by 2 points. It does his mobility, escapability, improvisational skills. It does give you that added element that's hard for defensive coordinators to plan for. So maybe that's part of the thought process. There's the experience factor, as well, as we've mentioned, but it's not as easy a decision as I think a lot of the fans would like to make it out to be.
Yep. Lev, you got any mailbag questions your way?
Yeah, I do. Let's start with this one from Jonathan Vasquez. It's kind of more of a national question, but who do you think is the best team in the nation right now? I thought it was Washington before the U of A game, but now I don't feel that way. This came in before this past weekend's games. Going into this week, I had Texas number one in my AP Top 25. They lost to a very good Oklahoma team in a back and forth game. In my new rankings, Justin, I put Michigan at number one, and I had moved Georgia down from 1 to 6. I moved them back up to number 2. I think they just kind of decided, hey, we're going to start playing now, but we're going to get serious. They boot stomped Kentucky, which had risen into the top 20 in the country. So I don't know. This year's really interesting because you could make a case for 8 or 9 teams being the best in the country. Michigan really hasn't played anyone that's that good, but they've also dominated everyone they've played. They've been incredibly consistent. The 10 points that they gave up this last week, that's the most points they've allowed in a game so far this season, which is a crazy statistic. Ohio State feels like they're maybe not quite as good as they've been in recent years, but still dangerous, always loaded with all kinds of talent. Like I said, Georgia might have just decided, hey, we're going to get serious now. They've kind of cranked it up. Florida State still hasn't lost. You still have USC undefeated, Oregon undefeated, Washington undefeated. So I don't really know the answer to that question. As of today, I say Michigan, but I reserve the right to change my mind a week from now.
I'm all in on Michigan, man. And I think that they have arguably the best running back in the country in Blake Corum. And their defense is just playing at such a high level right now. The fact that they gave up 10 points last week, and that's the most that they've given up all season long, that's a ridiculous stat. And oh, by the way, that's in addition to scoring 52 points against the Gophers. So I'm all in on Michigan, man. You took the answer right out of my mouth. Give me the Wolverines.
All right, here's one from Patrick Stark, who's one of our really good followers and has a lot of good, smart questions. He said, I really like Jed and trust him, but do you feel like he has some stubbornness starting to show, especially regarding substitution patterns with the wide receiver position and Maldonado? Maldonado, of course, is Gunnar Maldonado. He's a safety who's had some struggles this season as well as last. The coaching staff really likes him, and he had a good game.
He did.
Against Arizona. It was one of the maybe the highest graded game of his career, according to PFF. I think they just like the fact that he's smart.
Yeah.
He's a leader back there.
Experienced.
He does sometimes take some unnecessary risks as a player, but he also seems to kind of get everybody where they need to go. Hey, by the way, I want to point this out because we noticed it during the game and we haven't really talked about it much on our various platforms, but they did make one subtle change to the dollar package this past week, and that was the insertion of Martell Irby into the mix in place of Isaiah Taylor. So they've now figured out a way to get Traden Stukes and Martell Irby both on the field, even though they technically play the same position. I think that's a good move because Martell Irby seems like he's a real baller. Regarding the wide receiver position, Jed comes from the NFL. And in the NFL, they don't do a lot of platooning at wide receiver, not as much as you would see maybe in college. That being said, he has mixed it up a little bit more in recent weeks. We are seeing more of Kevin Green out there in certain packages in place of Montana Lamonius Craig, who has been a really good blocker for them, but just really hasn't been all that involved in the passing game. But you're not going to take T-Mac and Jacob Cowing off the field.
No.
Nor should you.
No.
Jacob only played 61 snaps in that game, but I think that was because he spent like a good chunk of the second quarter getting his ankle taped up in the locker room. T-Mac played every snap in that game, all 80. Kevin Green got 15 snaps.
Mm-hmm.
Malachi Riley's been kind of working his way in there a little bit. But that's just kind of Jed's NFL background when it comes to wide receivers. He just doesn't rotate a lot there.